Okay, so get this. We're looking at something pretty paradoxical today. There's this 500-year-old European theology, right, born from the Protestant Reformation, and somehow it's finding this incredible new life in modern, officially atheist China. You gotta ask, how on earth is that possible? Well, let's dig in.
And I mean, look at this contrast. It's really a tale of two fates. Back in its old stomping grounds, Europe and North America, Calvinism's influence is, let's be honest, kind of fading in a lot of places. But then you look over at China, and it's a completely different story. Since the 90s, it's just been booming with this incredible energy and growth.
So that brings us to the big question, the real mystery we're gonna unravel here. How does a set of ideas from the 16th century, from Reformation-era Geneva, suddenly feel so urgent and so relevant to people in 21st century Beijing or Shanghai? The answer, it turns out, is way more interesting than you'd think.
To figure this out, we need a key. And that key is a concept called contextual theology. This idea is going to be what unlocks the whole puzzle for us, explaining why Calvinism landed in modern China at the exact right moment. So what is contextual theology? It's pretty simple, actually. It's the idea that no belief system just pops up in a vacuum. Every single theology, it doesn't matter if it's ancient or brand new, is a product of its time. It's shaped by, and it's usually a direct response to, the big events, the crises, and the questions of a very specific moment in history. And you can see this pattern all throughout history. I mean, think about it. If the Visigoths hadn't sacked Rome in 410, would Augustine have written his masterpiece City of God? Probably not. And what about Martin Luther? Would he have nailed those 95 theses to the church door without the whole controversy over selling indulgences? No way. In both cases, a huge theological moment was a direct response to a crisis. So that sets up our big question. What was the crisis in post-1999?
Okay, so we've got our time frame post-1989. Now we got to look at the scene. This was a moment that created a massive spiritual and intellectual vacuum in China. It was truly the event that changed everything. The year was 1989. This is the turning point. This is the year that sets the stage for everything we're talking about today. The crackdown on the student-led protests in Tiananmen Square just sent shockwaves across the country. It led to this deep, profound disillusionment, especially for students and intellectuals. Suddenly, the old answers, the old ideologies, just weren't cutting it anymore, and that left a huge spiritual void. People started desperately searching for new ideas, new beliefs, new ways to make sense of their world. And this void, it created two very specific crises. And here's the surprising part. Calvinism, this old theology from half a world away, happened to offer a really compelling answer to both of them. For a certain group of people, it was absolutely the right theology at the right time. This chart just lays it out so clearly. On the one hand, you had what you could call theological chaos. All these different Christian groups were popping up, some of which the government called evil cults, and people were craving order and correctness. Calvinism, with its focus on reason and scripture, gave them that. Then, on the other hand, you had this deep intellectual disillusionment. The thinkers and the academics, they needed a new way to think about society and the state. And again, Calvinism provided a whole toolkit with concepts like covenant and church that they could use for political thought. So let's zoom in on that first crisis. With religious belief growing so fast, things got messy. You had groups like Eastern Lightning popping up, and there wasn't a lot of formal training for pastors, so many Christians just felt adrift. This led to something called theology fever, this intense desire for a belief system that was solid, correct, and intellectually sound. And for a lot of these people, Calvinism basically became the definition of orthodoxy. It felt like a safe harbor of reason in a sea of chaos.
And then there was that second crisis, which was really brewing among the urban elite. The professors, the lawyers, the artists. After 1989, so many of them who'd been pushing for democratic reforms just felt crushed. But they didn't give up on changing society. Instead, they started looking for a new foundation, a really robust framework for thinking about big ideas like the rule of law, the state, and what a civil society could look like.
And this is where things get really fascinating. For these intellectuals, Calvinism wasn't just a religion they adopted. It became a whole new language, a new vocabulary they could use to express their existing dreams of social and political change. But now it was all grounded in a deep theological framework. So how did that actually work? Well, take a guy like Wang Yi. He was a prominent law professor who became a Reformed pastor, and he started making this argument that ideas from covenantal theology, this concept of a binding agreement between God and humanity, well, that wasn't just for church. He saw it as a historical foundation for constitutionalism, for the idea that a government's power should be limited by law. That was a really powerful new way to talk about the rule of law in China.
You can almost map out the path these thinkers took. Step 1, they're advocating for political liberalism. Step 2, they get disillusioned and they convert to Christianity. Step 3, they discover Reformed theology. And then, here's the crucial final step, they start using its ideas as a new theological language to argue for the very same goals they had in the first place, like constitutionalism. It was like they were reframing their political ideals in this new, powerful theological language.
So let's bring it all home. Why does this surprising story matter? What's the big takeaway? Well, it all comes back to that idea we started with, a perfect fit between a set of ideas and a very specific moment in time. The most important thing to remember is this. Calvinism's rise in China wasn't a fluke. It wasn't an accident. It flourished because its specific ideas about order, reason, and society offered concrete answers to the very real, very unique questions people were asking in the wake of 1989. And this chart just sums it up perfectly. You can see the growth was powered pretty much equally by these two big needs that came out of that moment. You had the popular demand for theological order on one side, and the elite's search for an intellectual framework on the other. Sure, there were some historical missionary roots, but the recent explosion, that is overwhelmingly a story of a theology meeting its moment. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The story of Chinese Calvinism is this amazing reminder that ideas, just like anything else, have their seasons. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What ideas, whether they're ancient or brand new, are out there right now, perfectly suited to answer the biggest, most pressing questions of our own time and our own place?